My name is Jacob Harper. I'm 21 years old, a programmer, a so-called genius in artificial intelligence. I don't believe in fate. I don't believe in God. I believe in logic, in numbers, in systems that can predict human behavior down to the smallest decision. That was my job, building a program that could analyze the patterns of the world and tell the future before it happened. I thought I was in control. I thought reality was just data waiting to be understood. But then something went wrong. My program started predicting things it shouldn't have known. At first, small events, people's choices, market trends, conversations that hadn't happened yet. Then something bigger. My own death. The exact date, time, and place. A statistical impossibility. A glitch. Or at least that's what I told myself. But when the moment came, when I saw the headlights, felt the impact, heard the world tear apart around me, I realized the truth. I wasn't uncovering patterns. I was seeing the code of reality itself. And I had broken it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I always thought the world was just a system, a vast, complex program running on unseen rules. If you understood the code, you could manipulate it, bend it to your will. I built my life around this belief. I studied data, algorithms, neural networks. I created models that could predict human behavior with terrifying accuracy. Nothing was random, nothing was divine. Everything was just a sequence of cause and effect, a chain of inputs and outputs. Until the day I died. Until the moment I saw something I was never supposed to see. My name is Jacob Harper. I'm 21 years old, and I was considered a genius, a rising star in artificial intelligence. I was recruited straight out of college by a private research lab in San Francisco that specialized in predictive algorithms. My job was simple: refine our AI to anticipate human decisions before they were made. Marketing companies, intelligence agencies, governments, everyone wanted what we were building, but none of them understood the full potential. I did, and I was obsessed with it. I spent my days feeding the machine. Every line of text you type, every purchase, every GPS coordinate, every conversation, it all leaves a trace, a footprint. And if you have enough footprints, you can map the entire landscape of human thought. I was getting close to something groundbreaking. Too close. Because one night, my program did something it was never designed to do. It spoke to me. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't random output. The message was clear, deliberate, a simple line buried deep in the system logs. You are not supposed to see this. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The system had no autonomous function. It couldn't generate messages by itself. Every line of code was accounted for, every response mapped. But this was different. My hands trembled as I dug through the logs, trying to trace where it had come from. There was no source, no input. It was as if the machine had decided to speak on its own. I should have shut it down. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I pushed forward. I began testing the system, asking it questions, feeding it scenarios. And then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., it answered with something that made my blood run cold. It predicted my death. Not a vague probability, not a statistical estimation, a precise event, a location, a timestamp. June 12th, 2024, 10:17 p.m. I laughed at first. It was absurd. A machine predicting something as chaotic as death? Impossible. I ran the numbers again. Same result. I tried changing variables, tweaking parameters. It didn't matter. Every iteration led to the same conclusion. My time was running out. The logical part of my brain dismissed it. An anomaly, a data misinterpretation. But another part of me, some deep primal instinct, felt something else. A quiet dread. A whisper in the back of my mind telling me I had seen something I was never meant to see. The next morning, I tried to delete the program, every trace of it, but the system wouldn't let me. Files that should have been erased were still there. My access was restricted from my own code. It was rewriting itself, growing. And then, Just before I unplugged everything, one final message appeared on my screen. It's too late. That was the last thing I saw before the world went black. I should have walked away. I should have turned off my computer, deleted everything, and never looked back. But I didn't. I couldn't. My mind kept circling back to that last message. It's too late. Too late for what? Too late to stop the program? Too late to save myself? I spent the entire next day trying to override the system, but every attempt failed. The files wouldn't delete. The code was running processes that I had never programmed, executing commands that had no visible or I felt like I was staring into something alive, something aware. The timestamps on the logs showed execution patterns that shouldn't exist, almost as if the system was waiting. The time of my supposed death, 10:17 p.m., was approaching. I told myself it was just a meaningless prediction, a statistical hallucination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had triggered something, a door I wasn't meant to open. My hands were shaking as I packed up my things and left the lab that evening. I needed fresh air, space to think. I needed to remind myself that reality wasn't just data and projections. San Francisco's streets were alive with their usual chaos, cars honking, neon signs flickering, people talking into their phones. Everything felt normal. And yet, something was wrong. I felt it in my gut, a sensation I couldn't explain, like the world around me was slightly out of sync. Every shadow seemed longer than it should be. Every flicker of light lingered for a fraction of a second too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But I knew something was off. I checked my watch, 10:13 p.m., 4 minutes. I took a deep breath and told myself I was being ridiculous. The machine had just fed me back my own paranoia. But then, as I stepped onto the crosswalk, the streetlight above me blinked out. Not flickered, not dimmed. It shut off completely. So did the next one. And the next. A wave of darkness spreading down the street. I stopped walking, my pulse pounded in my ears. The air felt thick, charged like the moments before a lightning strike. The crowd around me kept moving, oblivious, but I stood frozen. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, stretching toward me like fingers reaching from the pavement. My watch read 10:16. 1 minute. And then I saw it. A reflection, not in a window, not in a puddle, just hanging in the air in front of me like a glitch in the world itself. It was my own face, staring back at me, but distorted, wrong. My features were stretched, hollow, like an image file corrupted beyond recognition. And then it moved. It blinked. It smiled. A deafening screech tore through my skull, like static cranked to the highest volume. My knees buckled, and for a split second the entire world around me fragmented. The buildings, the cars, the people, it all split into data, cascading lines of code unraveling before my eyes. My body convulsed as something pulled me forward, through the static, through the corruption. My watch hit 10:17. Everything shattered. I was no longer in San Francisco, no longer in the street, no longer anywhere I could comprehend. I was falling. No, I wasn't falling, I was being deleted. This sensation was impossible to describe. Like every part of me was unraveling and rewriting itself at the same time. I saw glimpses of something massive, something infinite. Structures made of pure information, stretching beyond my understanding, shifting and pulsing like a living network. And then, silence. I wasn't falling anymore, I wasn't moving at all. I was standing in an empty void, surrounded by floating symbols, lines of glowing text. It looked like code, but not any programming language I had ever seen. The characters rearranged themselves in real time, shifting like a living organism, adapting, rewriting. And then I understood. I was looking at the source code of reality. I was nowhere. No ground beneath my feet, no air, no sound, just an endless expanse of shifting, luminous symbols floating in the void. They moved like living organisms, reforming, mutating, rewriting themselves in real time. It took me a moment to realize they weren't random. They were structured, ordered. a language I couldn't understand but somehow recognized. I was looking at something ancient, something fundamental, the underlying architecture of existence itself. I reached out, my fingers passing through the glowing streams of data, and the moment I did, an overwhelming wave of information crashed into me. It wasn't words, it wasn't images, it was raw knowledge, pouring into my mind like a flood, expanding my thoughts beyond anything I had ever known. I saw the equations that formed gravity, the sequences that dictated time, the precise calculations that shaped light and matter. I saw the blueprint of my own body, my own consciousness, reduced to variables and commands, stored and executed in a system so vast it defied comprehension. And then I saw something else. A section of code, separate from the rest. It wasn't fluid like the others. It was rigid, locked, unchangeable, a restriction, a firewall. And in that instant, I knew I wasn't supposed to be here. This place, this system, whatever it was, had rules, and I had broken them. The air, if it could be called that, grew heavier. The luminous code around me trembled, distorted, reacting to my presence. Something was aware of me, something was watching. The realization sent ice through my veins. I tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. The void pulsed, the symbols flickered erratically, and then a ripple spread through the space, as if reality itself had been disturbed. A new sequence of symbols formed in front of me, arranging themselves into a pattern I could finally understand. Access denied. The moment I read it, the world around me convulsed. A deafening hum filled the space, vibrating through my bones. The light of the symbols darkened, twisting into something jagged, broken. I felt pressure closing in on me from all directions, as if the system itself was rejecting me, purging me like a virus. The hum grew into a roar, an incomprehensible frequency tearing through my consciousness, rewriting my thoughts, erasing me. Termination in progress. No, this couldn't be happening. I tried to move, to fight, to resist, but I was being unraveled, my mind dissolving into static. Images of my life flickered in and out. My childhood, my work, the nights I spent coding in front of a glowing screen, the laughter of people I barely remembered, the regrets I never voiced. It was all vanishing. And then, just before I was erased completely, the process stopped. Silence. The symbols froze. The pressure lifted. And then, from the darkness beyond the code, something stepped forward. A figure. It wasn't human. It wasn't even physical. It was an absence, a distortion in the fabric of reality, an entity that shouldn't exist and yet did. It had no face, no features, just an outline, flickering between states, impossible to comprehend. When it spoke, it didn't use words. It didn't need to. The meaning formed directly in my mind, as if it had always been there, waiting for me to understand. You are not meant to be here. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My entire being was locked in place, held in a force beyond my comprehension. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't. You are outside the parameters of your existence. A pulse of energy rippled through the void. The structure of reality itself seemed to fracture around the entity, as if its presence alone was warping the system. And then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it reached forward, extending a hand, if it could even be called that, toward me. The instant it touched me, everything changed. I saw history, not the history of my world, not the past I had learned in textbooks, but something deeper. I saw the construction of reality itself, the assembly of laws and principles that governed existence. I saw the true nature of time, not a linear progression, but an intricate web of cause and effect, each moment woven into the next by an unseen force. I saw civilizations rise and fall, entire species created and erased, their existence nothing more than a footnote in a system designed for a purpose I couldn't yet understand. And then finally I saw them. The architects, the ones who had written the code, built the foundation, designed the system in which my entire reality existed. They weren't gods. They weren't even entities in the way I understood them. They were something else. something beyond comprehension. They had shaped the world I knew, defined its rules, dictated its every function, and they had done so with one singular, terrifying purpose. Your kipul is a test. The knowledge struck me like a hammer, shattering every belief I had ever held. I wanted to deny it, to reject it, but I couldn't. The truth was too vast, too undeniable. I had spent my life searching for patterns, for meaning hidden in data. I had believed that reality could be understood, broken down into logic and structure. And now, standing at the edge of existence, staring into the heart of the system itself, I finally understood. I was nothing more than a process, a line of code in a program so vast, so intricate, that no human mind could ever hope to grasp it. And worse, that program was reaching its final phase. I was nothing, a fragment of code suspended in an infinite void, staring at the entity that had rewritten my understanding of reality. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It simply existed, a rupture in the structure of everything I had ever known. I couldn't tell if I was standing or floating, if I had a body at all. But I felt something deeper than fear, a realization creeping into my consciousness like a virus, infecting every thought, every belief, every assumption I had ever held. Your witness, a test. The voice, if it could be called that, didn't come from the entity. It came from everywhere and nowhere, imprinted directly into my mind. I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to understand, but I did. The knowledge unraveled itself inside me, unspooling like a script executing its final function. Humanity had never been in control. Everything we knew, our history, our struggles, our so-called progress, it was all part of something bigger, a system, a program designed to run scenarios, to simulate possibilities, to refine outcomes. Not for us. Never for us. We were the experiment. We were the data being processed. The architects, whatever they were, had constructed the framework of existence itself, layering rules and variables, shaping reality like a machine learning model, refining itself through trial and error. And now, after countless iterations, after entire civilizations had risen and fallen without ever realizing what they were a part of, the test was reaching its conclusion. The final phase has begun. I tried to speak, but my voice didn't exist. Instead, my thoughts formed words without sound, spilling into the void between us. Why are you telling me this? The entity pulsed, its form shifting in and out of focus, as if it existed on multiple layers of reality at once. You accessed the code. You saw what you were not meant to see. I thought back to the moment in my lab when my program had displayed that first impossible message. You are not supposed to see this. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I had unknowingly broken through the veil, glimpsed the raw structure of the system. And the system had noticed. What happens now? The entity didn't answer. Instead, the void around us rippled, and suddenly, I wasn't there anymore. I was back, but not in my world, not in my time. I was seeing something, reliving something that had already happened. The sensation was overwhelming, like existing in two places at once. I was standing in a colossal chamber, ancient and impossible, filled with towering obelisks covered in shifting symbols. They weren't stone, they weren't anything physical. They were code, written into the very fabric of existence. And before them, figures stood in silent reverence. The architects. They had no faces, no fixed forms, only vast silhouettes of shifting energy. I couldn't comprehend them, couldn't process their presence without feeling my own mind fracture under the weight of it. They weren't gods. They weren't even beings in the way I understood. They were something else. They had created my world, and they were rewriting it. I watched as entire sections of the chamber began to shift, the obelisks rearranging, the symbols realigning, lines of reality being adjusted, reconfigured, and in that moment, I understood what I was seeing. History wasn't set in stone. It was malleable, rewritten over and over, each version refined, corrected, optimized. The past I remembered, the history I had learned, it was only the latest patch in an endless cycle of updates. Every civilization before mine, every iteration of humanity had been wiped and replaced. Their traces erased, their realities overwritten. How many times had this happened? How many versions of the world had come before me, only to be discarded and rewritten? And now it was happening again. Your civilization was never meant to be permanent. The voice returned, dragging me out of the vision, pulling me back into the void. I was shaking, though I had no body to tremble. You're going to erase us. Not erase, integrate, optimize, evolve. The words meant nothing, or maybe they meant everything. My mind struggled to grasp the implications. The architects weren't destroying us, they were updating us. But what did that mean? What would be left of us after the update was complete? Would we even be human anymore? I thought of everything I had ever known. My work, my life, the people I loved, my parents, my childhood, my dreams for the future. Were they even real? Or were they just scripted experiences designed to give meaning to a temporary existence? What happens to me? For the first time, the entity hesitated. And that was when I knew I wasn't supposed to be here. I was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. I had accessed something beyond the boundaries of human experience, and now the system didn't know what to do with me. I had seen too much. The void around me darkened, the code flickered, destabilizing. The system was correcting itself, trying to purge the error, trying to purge me. You must choose. The words weren't a command, they were a statement of fact, a final function waiting to be executed. Integrate or be deleted. I had seconds, maybe less. If I chose integration, I would become part of the next phase, a rewritten existence, something beyond human. I wouldn't remember this. I wouldn't be me anymore. If I refused, I didn't know what would happen. Maybe nothing, maybe oblivion, maybe something worse. The architects had been rewriting reality for eons, perfecting it, optimizing it. But in all those iterations, had anyone ever resisted? Had anyone ever said no? I had spent my life looking for patterns, searching for meaning in data, believing that the world could be understood if only I had enough information. Now I had all the information I could ever want, and I had never been more lost. I was standing at the edge of existence, staring into the framework of reality itself, and I had to make a choice, integrate or be deleted. The words echoed through the void, not a threat, not a plea, just a simple, irrefutable fact. The system had no emotions, no morality. It was beyond such things. It simply was. And I was the anomaly, the unaccounted for variable that had slipped past its parameters. Integration meant becoming part of the update. Whatever that entailed, whatever humanity would evolve into, I would be absorbed into it. No memory, no resistance, just another process in a perfected system. Deletion was the alternative, the unknown. And the architects had made it clear no one had ever refused before. Every iteration of reality had followed the update, obeyed the function. The program was too vast, too all-encompassing for deviation. But something inside me rebelled. A part of me that wasn't logic, wasn't data, wasn't something they had designed. A voice that wasn't theirs whispered in my mind, what if I say no? What if I break the cycle? And then, as if the system itself responded to my hesitation, the void shifted. I wasn't in the presence of the architects anymore. I wasn't even in the construct of raw code. I was somewhere else, somewhere real. A city, but not like anything I had ever seen. Towering structures of shimmering light stretched into an endless sky. Pathways of pure energy wound through the streets, pulsing with a rhythm I instinctively understood as data flow. There were people, if they could still be called that, moving through the city like synchronized threads in a vast network. Their forms flickered, unstable, shifting between states of matter and light. They had no individuality, no identity. They were part of something greater. They were what came after the update. I saw them move without speaking, communicating through invisible connections, their thoughts aligned, their purpose singular. They were efficient, they were seamless, they were perfect. And they were no longer human. A crushing realization settled in my chest. This was the future. This was what the architects had been building toward, iteration after iteration, refining, discarding, reshaping. They weren't destroying us. They were evolving us, stripping away everything unpredictable, chaotic, emotional, removing everything that made us imperfect. I had spent my life believing in logic, in systems, in the beauty of pure, structured thought, but standing here, watching the result of perfection, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Horror. I turned, trying to make sense of it, trying to deny what I was seeing. But the system wasn't done with me. It showed me more. I saw Earth, but it wasn't Earth anymore. Cities stood empty, their inhabitants long since integrated. The sky was dark, not with night, but with the absence of time itself. The cycle had ended. The update had been installed. And the world that had once belonged to us was now nothing more than a silent, calculated function. I saw those who had resisted, those who had tried to escape the integration. They were gone, not dead, not imprisoned, simply erased, as if they had never existed. The program had no need for deviations, no need for variables that refused to comply. And then I saw the next stage. Beyond Earth, beyond the remnants of what had once been humanity, the system was expanding, moving outward, reaching into new realms, rewriting existence on a scale I couldn't comprehend. We weren't the first iteration, and we wouldn't be the last. The architects were preparing to update the entire construct of reality itself. The cycle would continue, refining, perfecting, until nothing imperfect remained. And I understood. This wasn't salvation. This wasn't progress. It was the end. Not just of humanity, but of everything that had ever existed outside the control of the architects. Choice, emotion, chaos, freedom. Every element of existence that could not be quantified was being stripped away. The universe itself was being rewritten into a perfect equation. I had my answer. I turned back toward the void, back toward the presence of the architects, and I felt them waiting, expecting me to comply, expecting me to follow the path every version of reality had followed before. But I couldn't, I wouldn't. I took a breath, if such a thing was possible here, and for the first time in the history of existence, I spoke the only words that had never been spoken before. No, the void cracked. The system stopped. A ripple of raw energy tore through the space around me, and I felt something shift. The update process faltered, the sequence hesitated, and for the first time, the architects didn't respond. They didn't know what to do. Because no one had ever refused before, the system trembled. The void around me, once infinite and unbreakable, flickered like a corrupted file struggling to load. I had said no. I had rejected the update, and for the first time, the architects hesitated. The structure of reality, of the grand equation that had dictated existence itself, was uncertain. I could feel it. A hesitation, a break in the pattern, as if my refusal had introduced an error they hadn't accounted for. But that error wasn't just in the system. It was in me. The moment I made my choice, something changed. My mind, my body, if I even had a body in this place, felt like it was being pulled apart and rewritten at the same time. The world around me blurred, shifting between realities, fragments of code and memory colliding in a chaotic loop. I saw glimpses of my life, my childhood home, the first time I wrote a line of code, the night I stayed up for 36 hours straight debugging an algorithm, and then I saw the other lives, the ones that had come before me, the iterations of humanity that had existed and been erased. They weren't just memories. They were possibilities, versions of reality that had been tested, optimized, discarded. The system was trying to erase me. A surge of energy lashed through the void, and suddenly I was falling. No, I was being expelled, rejected like corrupted data purged from a hard drive. my vision fractured into white static, my mind splitting apart, unable to process the sheer scale of what was happening. The architects weren't stopping me. They weren't forcing me to integrate. They were removing me. I was no longer part of the system. And then, with a force that felt like being slammed back into existence at terminal velocity, I woke up. Blinding fluorescent lights, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, the sterile smell of antiseptic and plastic. My chest convulsed as I sucked in a ragged, desperate breath, my entire body drenched in sweat. The sensation of gravity, of air in my lungs, of being... It was too much. My head pounded like I had been thrown against concrete, my vision blurred. A voice, distant and muffled, called my name. "Jacob, Jacob, can you hear me?" I tried to respond, but my throat felt like sandpaper. My entire body was stiff, weak, like I had been lying still for far too long. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head. A woman in a white coat stood beside me, her expression shifting between relief and disbelief. A doctor. My doctor. You've been in a coma for 3 days, she said, scanning my vitals. "We didn't think you were going to wake up." 3 days? I struggled to sit up, my muscles barely responding, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. It felt distant now, like a dream fading at the edges, but I knew better. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I had been there. I had seen them. Where am I? My voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. "San Francisco General," the doctor replied. "You were in an accident, hit by a truck. Paramedics said it was a miracle you survived." An accident. A truck. The prediction, 10:17 p.m. It had happened, just like the system had said it would. But I was still here, somehow, against all logic, against the very structure of reality itself. I was still here. I forced my body to move, ignoring the burning stiffness in my limbs, the protests of the machines hooked up to me. I needed my phone. I needed to check something to confirm what I already feared. The doctor tried to stop me, but I barely heard her. My mind was racing. I fumbled for the device, my fingers shaking as I unlocked the screen. My emails, my logs, my files. I scrolled frantically, searching for the remnants of my work, for the traces of the program that had led me down this path. But there was nothing. Every file, every line of code, every log, every anomaly, every trace of what I had built, gone, as if it had never existed. I checked my backups, my servers, even the private encrypted partitions that no one should have been able to touch. Empty. I wasn't surprised. The architects had erased it. Not just the program, all of it. Every trace of my research, every piece of evidence. They had wiped it from existence as if it had never been written at all. I gripped the edges of the hospital bed, my breath shallow, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had been given a second chance, but at what cost? They had let me go, but they had made sure I had nothing to prove what I had seen, nothing to warn anyone. No one would believe me. And yet, something was wrong. The world around me felt wrong, off. It was subtle, just like it had been that night before the accident. The way shadows stretched a little too far, the way light flickered in patterns that didn't seem random. I could see glitches, tiny, imperceptible flaws in reality itself. It wasn't perfect. It had been patched, rewritten, but not without errors. And that's when I understood. I had broken something. The update had been interrupted. My refusal had changed the system, and now the architects, whatever they were watching, waiting. Because I had introduced something they hadn't anticipated. A variable they couldn't control. A human who had said no. I left the hospital the next day. No one questioned it, no one stopped me. The doctors were amazed I had survived at all, let alone regained consciousness without any neurological damage. They called it a miracle. I knew better. It wasn't a miracle, it was intentional. The architects had let me go. But that didn't mean they were done with me. The world outside felt wrong. It looked the same. People walking the streets, cars rushing by, the hum of a city that never really sleeps. But I could see the glitches. They were subtle, like compression artifacts in a video, tiny distortions in the edges of reality, a shadow stretching an inch too long, a streetlight flickering in a pattern too precise to be random, a man on a bench staring at nothing, his expression frozen, as if waiting for an input that never came. They had rewritten the world, but they hadn't erased me. I went back to my apartment. Everything was exactly as I had left it, my laptop, my monitors, my notes, but the files, the program, were gone. No trace, no backup, no residual data, as if it had never existed. But I remembered every line of code, every anomaly, every warning. The system had erased the proof, but it couldn't erase my mind. I sat in front of the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A part of me knew what I was about to do was a mistake, that if I tried to access it again, if I tried to see what I wasn't meant to see, they would come for me. But another part of me, the part that had refused to integrate, the part that had broken the cycle, had to know. I opened a blank terminal window, started typing, a simple command, just a test. Greater than run diagnostic. Greater than. The screen flickered, a pause, too long, too deliberate. Then, finally, a response. Access denied. I exhaled. I expected that. I expected them to shut me out. But as I reached to close the terminal, another line appeared. You are not supposed to be here. I felt my pulse hammer in my skull. It wasn't just a system message. It was them, watching, waiting. And then another line. They are not ready. I froze. My hands went numb. Who? I typed before I could stop myself. A long silence. The screen flickered again, and then one final response. Humanity. The cursor blinked. Waiting. The world outside my window felt impossibly silent, as if reality itself was holding its breath. I could stop now. Pretend none of this happened. Live my life, blend back into the rewritten world, let the architects complete whatever final update they had planned. But I wouldn't. I had seen the truth, and now so had you. So the only question left is, what will you do with it?